Hi everyone, Grant K here for the Flame Learning channel. In part 1 of the new connected color workflow, we went through the fundamental concepts as well as the workflow between Lustre and Flame. In part 2, we take a closer look at the Lustre node in batch and how it affects the soft versus bake state of the grade metadata after working in Flame. Now we've already covered the basic workflow in part 1, so we'll start from the point where we have a timeline in Lustre, and I have a graded shot using source primaries and secondaries that need some VFX work. Once again, I am in the effects menu and I'm about to create a batch setup. Flame launches the project and we are in the batch environment. As a quick reminder, the Lustre node acts as the grade metadata connection between Flame and Lustre. This will be the focus of most of this video. The right node contains all the render paths for the composite, which have automatically been set by Lustre. Now we are going to examine the two grading states that occur in Lustre with the connected color workflow. The first state is known as soft. This typically occurs when the composite is built before the Lustre node in the flow graph. In other words, the grade happens further downstream and is not part of the actual composite. So I'll go to my custom node bin and drag out a pre-made flow graph. I'll go ahead and connect it before the Lustre node and into the pipeline. For time's sake, our composite is complete and you can render in Flame. Once the render is complete, you can Alt-Tab back to Lustre, and the renders have populated the selected shot. You can see this straight away as I scrub the time bar. Now take a good look at the effects menu. Looking at the middle section, you will see the defined grading pipeline. This runs in a linear order, starting with degrain, input LUT, CDL, input primaries, secondaries, plugins, output primaries, and finally output LUT. They are all currently set to soft because the VFX work happened before the Lustre grade node in batch. As an artist using the workflow, this means you can switch to the color menu and carry on grading as usual on top of the VFX shot. If you want to disable the composite, you would go back to the effects menu and toggle the enable button. This toggles between the source media and the VFX renders. So this is the first state of the grade metadata when the grading occurs after the VFX composite in the batch setup. Now let's delete the batch setup off the shot with the delete effects button and look at the second state of the grade metadata. Launching Flame from Lustre again, you'll get the same starting point. Remember to click Replace to overwrite the original entry which still exists on the Flame desktop with the same name. This time, I'll break the connection between the Lustre node and the right node. In the custom node bin, I'll drag out a flow graph and connect the output from the Lustre node as the graded source media for the VFX composite. Because the grade metadata occurs before the VFX composite, it is actually considered as part of the VFX result. Remember to connect the output of the flow graph back into the right node. Once again, I'll press Render. With the render complete, I'll Alt-Tab back to Lustre. Looking at the grading pipeline in the effects menu, you will see that all the components are now set to baked. This means that the grade was baked into the VFX composite as it was rendered back to Lustre. So initially, you might think that the grade is uneditable because a composite was rendered on top of it. However, it is possible to adjust and tweak the grade, but in a slightly different way compared to the previous state. Once again, you can go to the color menu and change the grade. As soon as you make any changes, the VFX render is invalidated. If you realize this is not what you wanted, you can undo the operation with Ctrl-Z. However, I do want to update the grade, so the render becomes invalidated with any grade changes. Now if you go back to the effects menu, you can see that the enabled button is still on. However, the yellow flag on the shot tells you that the batch setup needs to be rendered again. When it is green, it means there is already a rendered VFX composite on the shot. However, with the invalidated render, toggling the Enable button does not do anything. If you click Render in Lustre, the new grading information will be rendered with the VFX setup. I'd like to point out that we have not gone back to Flame. However, Flame will start rendering in the background and the results will update in the Lustre timeline. Just to be clear, this is Flame rendering the batch setup and not Lustre. You can also send batch setups to render over burn background rendering if you have that in your facility. So now you'll have your new grade baked in with the VFX renders. Incidentally, if you were to go back to the original VFX setup by clicking the Edit button, the VFX batch setup will load, but it will also load the new grade as well. The grade metadata connection is always maintained between the two applications, and you could make adjustments in either application. Now finally, the Lustre node in batch represents the grading metadata pipeline from Lustre. So far, you've seen what happens with VFX before the grading metadata. This is called soft. You've also seen what happens with VFX after the grading metadata. This is referred to as baked. But if you double-click on the Lustre node, you can see its controls in the batch menu. Here you have a whole variety of metadata information relating to the grade metadata connection. This is a great way to track the Lustre metadata in the batch compositing environment. But I'd like to draw your attention to the Explode button on the left. Currently, the entire Lustre grading pipeline is represented as one node. When you explode the node, the various components of the Lustre pipeline are displayed as separate nodes. The number of nodes displayed are based on whether or not source primaries in secondaries is enabled or not. If it's enabled, you get the extended node pipeline. If source primaries are disabled, you still get the entire grade, but it is consolidated into 3 Lustre nodes. Just be mindful of both options. Now, because the grading pipeline can be broken down into various components, you have the ability to insert VFX tools in the middle of the grading pipeline. This is really cool. For example, let's say you want to composite with the primary grade, but then have the secondaries apply to the result of the composite. So I'll break the connection in the middle of the grading pipeline. We can make room for the extra nodes, and I'll go to the custom node bin and drag out a VFX composite. The primaries will be graded media going into the VFX nodes, and the output of the composite will be plugged into the secondaries. This is actually creating a non-linear type of workflow by mixing the grading and VFX toolset. Once again, I'll press Render. Back in Lustre, the Effects menu shows a mixture of baked and soft states in the grade pipeline. It's clear that you can identify at what point in the grading pipeline that the VFX composite was inserted. And similar to the first 2 examples, the grading metadata can be edited and tweaked after the fact. Remember that the soft state can be adjusted on top of the composite, and you can see the live grade update. Whereas with the bake state, any modifications invalidate the VFX render, but you can still tweak the grade. This will need to be re-rendered in order to see the combined result. Thinking about the big picture, the big advantage of using the connected color workflow is that you can round trip between grading and VFX as many times as you like. You can set up the flow graph pipeline to achieve your final looks, and the workflow is flexible enough to accommodate your working style. In part 3, we look at the grade and batch setup management between Lustre and the other Flame products. So you'll see how the Lustre grade bin deals with grades and batch setups, as well as creating custom Lustre nodes in batch. Be sure to check out the other videos covering the features, workflows, and updates to the Flame 2017 products. Comments, feedback, and suggestions are always welcome and appreciated. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the Flame Learning channel for future videos.